These days, as more and more people become increasingly interested in contemporary witchcraft, we're seeing so many more diverse beliefs, practices, and ways of doing witchcraft emerge. But what does it mean to be skeptical and still practice witchcraft? In other words, what does it mean to be a skeptical witch? In this video, I want to take a look at the 3 main ways that I have seen skeptical witchcraft emerging in today's contemporary world, as well as taking a look at what it means for me personally to be a witch. Hello YouTube, I am Sarah, the Skeptical Witch, perhaps also known as Obscure Clouds if you have read my blog. And since this is my very first video on YouTube, I figured I'd kind of give you a little bit of an introduction to me, who I am, just so you kind of know where I'm coming from and where I am situated within the wider witchy and pagan community. First, I am a pagan. I consider myself part of the kind of wider pagan tradition. Within that, I am a nature-based, kind of nature-centered pagan. So rather than tending towards the polytheistic worship of gods and goddesses, I'm more focused on kind of following the natural rhythms and patterns of the earth. And while I do work with gods and goddesses sometimes, usually it's kind of as metaphors for the natural world, or as kind of archetypes to represent aspects of the psyche. I'm also a pantheist rather than a polytheist. So basically I believe that everything in the universe is sacred and divine and interconnected. My pantheism is also very compatible with science, so this means that I don't necessarily believe in kind of any other spirit world that's separate from this world. And as I mentioned in the introduction to this video, I also consider myself a skeptical witch. So, what does this mean? Even though witchcraft is generally associated with the otherworldly, with the occult, with kind of being woo-woo in general, I don't think that you necessarily have to believe in these things to practice witchcraft. When we think about witchcraft, typically we think about using things like spells, magic, and other means of kind of changing objective reality in some way, changing the world to match up with our intentions. Witchcraft is very much about intention and about putting your intention out into the world and getting something back. So, I'm here to tell you that this doesn't necessarily have to be irrational. It doesn't necessarily have to clash with a scientific worldview. It can be skeptical and still be witchcraft. So personally, I hesitated forever to actually call myself a witch because of these associations with kind of the woo, with a lack of reason, with a lack of kind of foundation in the actual world and how things actually work and what we know. So because of that, and because I kind of consider myself to be like a rationally minded academic, it took me forever to actually claim the word witch and to actually start using that. And yet, even though I found that witchcraft was kind of clashing with this way that I saw the world, there was something about it that kept pulling me in. And there was something about witchcraft that kind of continued to fascinate me and continued to make me want to be a part of it in some way. So I started practicing witchcraft. And when I did start practicing, I kind of realized that you don't actually need to necessarily wholeheartedly believe in things like spirits or the other world or manipulation of energies or changing objective reality to practice it and for it to be a meaningful and transformative experience. Because that's largely what witchcraft is about to me. And I think to a lot of people, is that aspect of transformation. By actually starting to practice witchcraft and really getting into it, I realized that I didn't have to give up my scientific beliefs or my understanding of the world to actually have it be meaningful to me and to actually make a difference in my life. Basically, I realized that I could be a skeptic and still practice witchcraft at the same time. The two are not mutually exclusive. So with all this in mind, I want to go over what I see as being the 3 kind of key ways of practicing skeptical witchcraft that I've seen emerging in our contemporary society and among the witches that I know and have heard from on this topic. Now, that's not at all to say that there are only 3 ways of practicing skeptical witchcraft. Far from it. I'm sure there's plenty more. And if you know of any or would like to add your thoughts on this, I would love to hear them. So please leave in the comments below. The first form of skeptical witchcraft is what we could kind of call naturalistic witchcraft. So this is witchcraft that is rooted in naturalism, which is the belief that there is the existence of the physical, material, objective world, and that nothing really exists beyond that. So there is no kind of spiritual otherworld or supernatural realm or ethereal plane or anything like that. This is witchcraft that is rooted in the physical, natural world. It's kind of an earth-centered kind of witchcraft that focuses on kind of the properties and elements of nature as they are, as we can know them tangibly and in a more realistic and kind of practical sense. This can be about getting in touch with the natural and non-human world, connecting to aspects of the land, connecting to plants and herbs, anything like that really. So this is a kind of witchcraft that doesn't need a belief in the supernatural or anything that can't be explained by science, because the natural world in and of itself is taken to be magical and already enchanted in a way, because nature is just freaking amazing and there isn't really a need to go beyond that. This kind of witchcraft may overlap with green witchcraft in a sense, because it does kind of deal with like properties of the natural world, can be very much intertwined with herbalism, the making of like potions, tinctures, teas, herbal remedies, anything like that. So that can be kind of intertwined with this. But it's very much about the material, physical, realistic properties of things, rather than their symbolic properties. So by symbolic properties, I'm kind of talking about magical correspondences and things, these symbolic kind of meanings that we've overlaid onto certain things in magic and the occult and witchcraft. So an example of like this symbolic or kind of correspondence way of looking at herbs and the natural world would be saying things like, oh, like garlic is used for protection, so you can hang it by your door to protect your house or something, or saying that you should use basil in a spell for wealth and prosperity, right? So these are the symbolic kind of meanings that we have attached to these things, rather than the properties that are actually associated with them physically and materially. So instead, what more naturalistic witchcraft would look like would maybe be more practical in a sense. So that might be using something like ginger, for example, to help with nausea, or chamomile to help with sleep. So I think a lot of witches, especially green witches, do kind of incorporate these more naturalistic elements into their practices. So yes, that is naturalistic witchcraft, is basically connecting with the natural world as it is without the need for kind of other dimensions, spiritual realms, spirits, deities, anything like that. Anything that can't be explained by science or experienced in the material world. The second kind of framework of skeptical witchcraft is psychological witchcraft. So this is witchcraft that focuses on inner transformation rather than on necessarily changing external reality through magic. And this is, I think, one of the most popular forms of witchcraft among skeptical witches. So psychological witchcraft builds off of the psychological model of magic. And if you don't know, there are 4 main models of magic that I'll kind of briefly go over here. The models of magic are basically used by witches and other magical practitioners to explain how magic happens, to explain where magic comes from and how they're able to kind of perform witchcraft. So the first model is the spirit model, and this is the oldest model of witchcraft. And as it kind of states in the title, it is the belief in the spiritual other world. So the belief that there is a spirit world that kind of overlaps and intertwines with this one. And that certain magical practitioners, such as shamans, for example, are able to kind of traverse into that world or communicate with this magical other world, and that the magical practitioner communes with this world in order to access that magic. The second model of magic is the energy model, and this is the one that I think most contemporary practitioners of witchcraft, as well as people within the kind of more new age spirituality side of things, use. So this is the belief that our world is made up of these vibrant energies, and that by kind of manipulating these energies through witchcraft, through spiritual practice, through ritual, through anything kind of that sort, we can manipulate and change how reality kind of flows in a way. We can change and manipulate the flow of these energies to make them work for us in alignment with our own intentions. The third model is the newest model, and that is the cybernetic model of magic, and it's the one that I understand the least. I've kind of looked at the least. I'm a little bit confused by it, but generally what I've grasped from it is that when you do witchcraft, there are kind of like microscopic small changes that take place in your mind that can then be kind of transferred into the world in a macroscopic way, so that can cause kind of macroscopic changes in the world. So small changes in your mind can cause big changes in the world because everything is interconnected, and it's like the butterfly effect. And personally, I'm really interested in like cybernetic theory and cybernetic philosophy. So this is like a really interesting kind of area of magic for me. I just haven't really looked into it that much yet. And finally, there is the psychological model of magic. The psychological model of magic is kind of different from the other models in that it doesn't necessarily try to explain how magic works, but rather how magic and the practice of doing magic influences how we think about things and influences us on a kind of unconscious psychological level. So within the psychological model of magic, magic is seen as kind of using symbols, correspondences, metaphors, and things like that in order to kind of tap into this unconscious mind and draw connections between the consciousness and the unconsciousness, so that we're more likely to act in accordance with our intention, with our goal, with whatever the purpose of the magic is. The psychological model of magic is based on the idea that reality is so fundamentally shaped by our perception of the world that what we think kind of creates the world in a sense. Following from this, using magic can then in turn shape reality for us. The placebo effect is something that falls into this category as well, because it's almost tricking the mind in a way to think that something is real or something is happening when really it's just kind of a substitute. And I think a lot of skeptical practitioners of magic think of magic this way, is that magic is kind of a placebo in a way. Like it's not actually transforming objective reality in any way, but if we think that it is, then we can start to act in accordance with that and hopefully act in ways that align us with attaining our goals. So an example of this is like the use of crystals, for example. Crystals for me are very much kind of a placebo effect kind of thing. So I know that the material makeup of amethyst isn't necessarily going to like de-stress me or cause peace or like help me get to sleep. But I still keep a chunk of amethyst by my bed because I associate it with those things, and therefore it has this kind of placebo effect on me. So Sedna Wu is another YouTuber who makes really great videos on witchcraft and the placebo effect. She talks a lot about what is called the open label placebo effect. So this is the idea that even if you know that it's a placebo, your mind can still kind of act as though it were real and can still kind of gain the benefits that you would gain even if you didn't know that it was a placebo. So definitely check out Sedna Wu's channel. I will leave a link down below if you want to look into that. Finally, the third way of doing skeptical witchcraft is what I'd kind of call chaos-driven witchcraft, or like fluid witchcraft. I don't know, I'm not really sure what exactly to call it because it's not exactly chaos magic per se, but it is kind of inspired by chaos philosophies and chaos ways of looking at the concept of belief. This is the kind of skeptical witchcraft that I'm personally most inclined towards, and the kind of skeptical witchcraft that I've written about a lot on my blog. I will leave links to that down below if you want to check out that further. This kind of chaos-driven perspective of doing skeptical witchcraft stems from the idea that belief is fluid. Belief is not static. Belief doesn't have to be kind of the same all the time, but rather can adapt to different contexts and different situations. It's about being able to shift from one paradigm to another, to go from being a non-believer to being a wholehearted believer. It's about being both a believer and a skeptic at the same time. Chaos magic is a way of practicing magic that is fundamentally results-based. What that means is that it is more focused on the experience of magic and essentially what you get out of it, rather than on finding explanations for magic or like trying to figure out how things work or why things work. It's not about how you get there necessarily, but what happens when you are there. As Phil Heim writes in Condensed Chaos, which I would highly recommend because it's a great book for anyone who's interested in chaos magic, explanations don't matter, experience does. And that is something that I have kind of believed from the beginning of doing witchcraft, is that it is all about the experience and not so much about like what anyone thinks of it or like whether it makes sense, really. It's more about how you feel, what works for you, and what is ultimately the outcome of it. So within chaos magic and kind of chaos-driven skeptical witchcraft, the idea is that belief is a tool, something that you can use in certain situations to basically get what you want out of the magic, out of the witchcraft. Regardless of maybe what you would normally believe outside of the magical or like ritual context. It's this idea that belief can change depending on needs, depending on context. It can mean treating like spirits, deities, magic, and all sorts of otherworldly or occult or woo-woo kind of things as if they were real in order to create certain experiences and have certain experiences and even to just kind of live in a more magical, enchanted kind of way. But for some people, this form of chaos-driven magic or fluid witchcraft, whatever you may call it, is just a suspension of disbelief, where you kind of put aside your beliefs momentarily to embrace another kind of way of interacting and engaging with the world. For me, it's a little bit more than that. Personally, I kind of see it as more like a total paradigm shift. So completely shifting from like one way of seeing the world to another way of seeing the world. And just getting it to a place where I can just like let go of the more kind of rational scientific side of my brain to just completely embrace magical ways of thinking. I think one of the most important things about chaos magic is that there is no right or wrong way of doing things. All that matters is what works for you as the practitioner, for you as the witch. It's about your experience. It's about what you do. It's about how you feel. It's about what you get out of it. And I don't think that anyone should ever have the right to tell you what should be done and what should not be done, what counts, what doesn't count, what's real, what's not real, what's witchcraft, what's not witchcraft, what's actual magic, what's not. I don't think that anyone has the authority to say this. And this has always been something that I've believed and continue to believe. So all this is not at all to say that I don't respect and acknowledge and admire pagans and witches who are not skeptical and who do truly genuinely believe in magic, who do believe that through their witchcraft they can influence the world in some way. They can change objective material reality. I don't at all like disrespect pagans and witches who do believe in the spirit world, who do believe in deities, who do believe in all sorts of things like that. Most of the pagans and witches that I know personally do believe in these things. They're not skeptics. And that's totally okay, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. And obviously, you know, there's something about that kind of way of seeing the world, that kind of magical, enchanted worldview that I appreciate and love, because I wouldn't be doing witchcraft. I wouldn't be considering myself a pagan. I wouldn't be participating in ritual. I wouldn't be doing spells. I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't have such a deep kind of love and attraction towards that kind of worldview and that way of living and that perspective. Just because I'm a skeptic doesn't at all mean that I think everyone should be skeptical. I think skepticism can be healthy sometimes, and having a bit of it is great, but I also totally respect people that that have different beliefs than I do, and I think that's wonderful. And I think that kind of talking about these beliefs and exchanging ideas is one of the greatest parts of being in a community like this, is that we can challenge each other and build off each other and get into really great discussions about things. So ultimately, I think that witchcraft for me is about balance. It's about balancing kind of a scientific, rational understanding of the world that is founded in material, objective reality with this more enchanted and magical kind of way of seeing things. It's about finding kind of a harmony and a happy medium between the two in a way, and about being able to immerse myself in magical beliefs sometimes and, you know, let go of the rational mind sometimes, while also at other times kind of keeping that worldview. So a final note is just that witchcraft is about what works for you. That's what I believe, what I've always believed, and what I will probably continue to believe till the end of time. It's about discovering what's true for you, what matters to you, and what, you know, has that transformative effect for you, and what feels good, what feels right, what makes you happy, what makes you want to keep doing it. And, you know, skeptic or not, you don't have to fit into any kind of predetermined labeled boxes that people might have created or that people might expect you to fall into. As I said in the beginning of this video, witchcraft is becoming increasingly diverse, and I think that's wonderful, and we're seeing so many different types of witches, so many different ways of doing witchcraft, and skeptical witchcraft is just one of them, and there's also just many ways of doing skeptical witchcraft. So thank you so much for watching this video, for listening to me ramble here. I'm sorry if the quality is terrible, if the editing ends up being terrible. This is my first time, so we'll see. This is all an experiment. But if you did like what I had to say and would like to hear more from me kind of on this topic, on skeptical witchcraft, on anything to do with that, then a like and subscribe would be awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, and stay safe, stay healthy, and stay skeptical, witches.